Welcome everybody to another American TESOL Institute featured teachers session. I'm your host, Jason Levine, also known as Fluency MC. I'm delighted and honored as always to be here with our featured teacher of the month for the month of June. It is my friend and future colleague, I hope, Mr. Will Aycox, also better known as Teacher Will in the world of English language teaching and English language learning. Teacher Will, thank you so much for agreeing to be our featured teacher of the month. You're doing really exciting things, especially the way you're connecting with English learners around the world in social media and Instagram. I know motivation is a big thing for you, and you're out there doing it, walking the walk. Welcome to Featured Teachers. American TESOL Institute welcomes you.
Thank you very much, brother, and thank you, teacher, for inviting me. I'm really honored and I'm humbled for the invitation. So let me just, I prepared a couple slides for everybody. If I see questions in the chat, I'll answer it there. If we don't answer it there, we'll make sure that we'll do Q&A, because this is really about you. Briefly about me, in the social media atmosphere, my name is Teacher Will. I happen to be from the United States of America, so I'm a native English speaker. That's great. A lot of times people, oh, you're native. As far as I'm concerned, English is a global international language. I recognize that by being a native English speaker, that's a privilege. But for me, English is a global international language. So regardless if someone is a teacher or a student, if they're a human being, they have a right to English. So how to overcome the English plateau? How can I take my English to the next level? And what's interesting about that is that, I speak English and I speak French, and I remember my own particular journey. I think it's important to figure out, like, okay, a lot of learners, even yourself, if you are learning English, know English, or though you're learning another language as a foreign language, second language, I think all of us in our lives, we've experienced a particular plateau. So very quickly, the agenda, a little bit more in detail of who I am. We'll give a definition about the English plateau. Why does it exist? And then more importantly, the bulk of the questions and the bulk of the conversation will relate to how can an individual overcome that English plateau, conclusion, and then just some Q&A. So a little bit about me. As I said, I was born in the United States of America. Interestingly enough, before I was a teacher, I was in the business world for 20 years across 4 different industries, mostly in positions as it relates to business development and or sales, whether it was telecommunications or government services, clinical research, financial services, franchise services. And how I entered the world of teaching was, if anyone was alive back in 2008, there was a financial crisis in the United States of America. I needed to take care of myself and my family. And so in about 2011, actually, it's my 10th year anniversary as of October. But in 2011, I decided to actually transition into the teaching world. I did have the opportunity to get an undergrad in English and history and 2 grad degrees. But I remember I was working for a financial services firm at the time, and I heard this advertisement or advertisement, depending on how you pronounce that, indicating learning English, travel the world. And then I was at my job during lunch, and I heard that advertisement again. And I was home watching National Geographic, and I heard it again. And in my culture, in my experience, I'm like, okay, well, if I hear something 3 times about the same particular subject, God is trying to tell me something. So I do not necessarily know if my directors are on the phone, but I did shout out to Mira and Deborah. I went back and got my TESOL certification. And for me, I thought that was important for a couple of reasons. Why? Number one, just because I'm a native English speaker, for me, does not necessarily mean that I'm a good teacher. As we all know, teaching is an art, teaching is a skill. And so I wanted to make sure that I have the foundations as it relates to teaching, whether it's, lesson planning, listening techniques, classroom management. And so I will always give credit if people think that I'm a good teacher, whether it's face-to-face on social media. I will always give credit to English Academy, Mira, and Deborah for that. And the second reason why I did that is because at the time when my first international assignment, I was looking at three particular countries: China, South Korea, and Saudi Arabia. And at the time, a lot of times people have asked me in the past, how did you end up in Saudi Arabia? To be honest with you, China at the time seemed extremely far. And South Korea, I had the opportunity growing up in the States to be and to know a lot of South Koreans. And so I really ended up coming to Saudi Arabia for my first international assignment for two primary reasons. Number one, the job offer that I received at the time was the most beneficial financially. And that's the first reason. And the second reason is I want to experience a completely different culture from the United States. While here, I've had different assignments. I first started in the English school, taught various different courses, was a national teacher trainer, worked with the sales and the sales team in terms of developing ESP classes and business courses. That was really nice. And currently, right now, I work for a private company where they have me extremely busy with business projects. ESP just finished, for example, an employee engagement guidebook. And then I found out recently today that I'm going to be the face of engagement within this company, making educational video material along with curriculum. I consider myself sometimes a social media influencer, even though that's a title that's been given to me. And one of the things I'm very proud of is in 2010, I was nominated, which I was very happy about. I'm a Goodwill ambassador, and that's something that's very important to me personally and professionally. So Plateau, why does it exist for learners? Why does it even exist sometimes for us as teachers, particularly if we're teaching something? Well, for those of you that are not aware, Plateau has two particular meanings. The first meaning of plateau refers to a physical level of high ground. Synonyms of the word plateau would include mesa, for example. But interestingly enough, the other definition of plateau is when we do a particular activity, in this case, particular English, and we're studying English, teaching English, whatever, and we don't necessarily see the progress that we want. From a learner's perspective, why does an English plateau, exist? Well, learners sometimes think and feel they're stuck at a certain level. Now, interestingly enough, from a teaching perspective, it's kind of like I've asked myself the question: have I been stuck? Have I reached my teaching plateau? Is my content material the same? Am I developing lessons or teaching lessons the same way, whether it's vocabulary or verb tense? If I'm developing content, am I actually stuck? The other reason why plateau might exist is learners might feel that they're learning nothing new, and or more importantly, additionally, that they're not seeing the results. Now, typically, as we all know, the plateau typically exists for learners as it relates to the intermediate level. Most learners have that particular level. They get stuck at a plateau when they're going from intermediate and they want to improve their proficiency. So those are some of the reasons from a learner's perspective. Interestingly enough, I would encourage you to think about, okay, are you at a English plateau as it relates to your teaching, whether you're teaching online, whether you're teaching face-to-face, whether you're teaching on content? Are you learning anything new? And if you are, it's great. If you're not, that's something that you have to assess. I normally say to people, particularly learners, I normally say it's kind of like, oh. I normally say to them, why do you focus on the problem? Why do you focus on the problem? How many learners do we know? How many students of yours normally focus on the problem? So what can a person do to overcome that? Before I get into that, let's talk about some reasons why it might exist. A lot of learners have lack of confidence. They don't believe in themselves. Now, let me make an honest statement. I've experienced an English plateau, not believing in myself, not thinking that I'm a good teacher, not thinking that or believing as though that the content that I'm developing, whether it's for social media purposes or from my students or my learners, is of value. So I've lacked confidence. And sometimes confidence in my own life has turned into or manifested into anxiety and or fear. Another reason, sometimes students are not necessarily allocating the proper amount of time to learn and study English. Now, interestingly enough, from a teaching perspective, ask yourself the question, are you allocating enough time as it relates to whatever you're doing in your world in terms of learning material, in terms of impression? Oftentimes, plateau exists for students because they have the same study routine with the same particular material. Also, students have goals Oh, I want to learn English. I want to be fluent. I want to speak just like teacher Jason, for example, fluency MC. So that's a long-term goal, but their goals are not SMART. And for those of you that don't know what SMART is, that's an abbreviation. They're not specific, measurable, attainable, realistic, and timely. And the last reason why people might, I want to briefly go into a little bit more detail about this. Why a plateau might exist for learners is because they don't necessarily have an educational support system around them, whether that's friends, whether it's family, or they live in societies or cultures that are really not supportive of English, is one. And for us teachers, one of the things that I've thought about and continue to think about, I think is really important in terms of my development just as an individual, and hopefully adding value and motivating students is like, hey, what am I doing as a teacher to have the proper educational support system around me? Who are colleagues, who are friends, whether they're in the industry or outside of the industry, that are supporting me as it relates to my goals, whether it's on social media and or face-to-face. So those are particular, this plateau might be exclusive for these particular reasons. With that being said, how can an individual eradicate that plateau? One of the things that I think is very important, at least I try to instill in my teachers and then my students, excuse me, and then also as someone who relates to when I was learning the language, one of the biggest impediments that I think is important is a mindset change. And trying to encourage students that, hey, listen, don't focus on the solution, focus on the problem. And there's an old proverb out there that death in life is in the power of the tongue. What do I mean by that? Well, as a student, I will manifest. How many students do you know, or maybe in the course of your experience and tenure of teaching? I can't, I'm shy, I'm dumb, I'm stupid. Well, therefore, as a result of that, they've manifested what they thought. So changing one's mind, moving from negative affirmations to positive affirmations. I will, I'm proud of myself, I respect my journey, is a mindset change is very important. And that's from a learner's perspective. One of the things that I would encourage you as teachers to do is think about, okay, do you need to have a mindset change as it relates to you and your teaching? What particular, if any, is there something particular that you need to know or learn? How honest are you having an assessment with yourself? Are you putting yourself down and possibly using negative words, and those negative words become associated behavior? And ultimately, that's a question that you need to answer. But I do think mindset change is important. How to break the plateau, the second, really to focus on the problem. Normally when I'm working with students, either in a group setting or an individual setting, like, listen, a lot of times weakness. Well, you know what? Weakness, let's change that word to have, instead of weakness or weaknesses, let's look at areas of development. Let's call it that. And our weakness is an opportunity for growth. And one of the things that I encourage people to do is, at least with the students, is like, listen, let's develop SMART goals for 30 days. So if a student or a learner is having a problem with respect to speaking, with respect to pronunciation, grammar, vocabulary, or any other particular subject, you have an opportunity to motivate them, get buy-in from them. Okay, let's have a goal and a plan for 30 days. And what becomes extremely critical in that, I believe, is that we encourage our students to monitor progress. Either, how can we do that? By writing the information down, by putting the information, making it a video. Because most of us as teachers, as we all know, we have 3 different ways of learning: visual, auditory, and tactile. So one of the things that I really encourage my students to do, whether it's a group setting or even internet or group setting or face-to-face setting, I'm like, listen, we're making a selfie, we're doing a video, monitoring this progress, and get the learner to sit back and say, like, okay, let's stop saying you can't. Let's stop worrying about the problem. Let's put you on a plan of success. That's from a learner's perspective. What about us as educators? What about us as human beings, or even as learners? The same thing can be applied. Why do I say that? Let's say, for example, that you're on your job, whatever it is, and you have a particular development. You don't feel as though that your pronunciation is where you want it to be, or your enunciation. Or from a social media perspective, you feel as though that you don't necessarily are developing content, or perhaps that you need to improve your editing skills, whatever it is. The same thing can be applied to us as teachers. Continuing. What else? I love this. I normally try to say to my learners in the ATW family, I'm like, you know what? Push the envelope. In my experience, and I'm sure most of you have more experience than I do, one of the biggest barriers and impediments I've heard learners saying learning English is they're learning English or studying English using the same process, same methodology. They're not really pushing the envelope by using the vast plethora of information out there. So change the way, let's encourage our learners to change the way they're thinking. For example, if you have learners that are sitting back getting the majority of their information via textbook, well, you know what? We as educators have an opportunity to sit back and say, hey, wait a minute. Have you considered a podcast? Have you considered a movie? Have you considered television series? But really encouraging the student to push the envelope. What's the value in that? The value is that they're learning different forms of studying. And if they do that, it can build confidence, motivation. And that's possible. Now, interestingly enough, let me make an I statement from a teaching perspective. That's one of the things that originally when I started my career in teaching, I had a problem with. And that's one of the things that I focus on. Okay, how can I change me as teacher will? If I'm doing in a class environment, regardless if I'm doing a class, whether it's individual or group, how can I change that? How can I change it up? Am I the type of person where, hey, you know what? I might be a teacher where I'm only going to use information in books. How comfortable am I utilizing social media? How comfortable am I using websites? How comfortable am I not even using websites or any form of social media? But let's just say, for example, how or could I teach a class with just a pen and a paper, for example? How comfortable am I in terms of pushing the envelope, in terms of doing the work that I need to do, analyzing and sitting back and saying like, okay, am I a serious teacher? Am I a motivated teacher? How willing am I to push the envelope as it relates to adapting my teaching style? Because I don't necessarily know about you, but I do know sometimes that, hey, I'm a human being. And sometimes as a human being, even though I know that change is the one constant in the universe, I sometimes can become stubborn. To break the English plateau, I suggest to learners, it's like, you know what, listen, even if you're a beginner, particularly this would certainly apply to if somebody is at the upper intermediate level, or upper intermediate level if we use the C for they're like, C1, C2, become a teacher, teach someone English. Now, obviously, what's the value of that? Well, if we're in the classroom and we encourage our students to become teachers to do a lesson, to talk about something, their hobbies, their interests, well, our talk time will decrease, their talk time will increase. Have your students, if you're not doing this, I encourage you to have your students teach someone English, particularly at the higher levels of proficiency. Yeah, that even can be done even with respect to beginners, but become teachers. And if they don't feel comfortable doing that, then there are tons of English games and English resources out there that you would know of. Again, I believe it's like, you know what, I'm a teacher and a student. And I've known this, and just a quick example, there was a student that I had about 2 years ago, very, very shy. And he wanted to quit English. And I said, okay, listen, brother, you and I are going to work on this plan together and just give me like 2 weeks. And if you commit to yourself and you want me to be your coach and your support system, I'll do that. Well, at the end, he was spending time in the lab because we had blended learning. He was spending time in the lab. You saw the change within him because he started to be motivated and inspired himself. And so part of the class that I had is that we were doing phrasal verbs. And so I was very, very proud of him, where it's kind of like, you know what, he took the initiative. He became the teacher. And then, interestingly enough, he got mad. He was like, no, it's this way, this way. So encourage your students to be teachers. How does that necessarily relate to myself as a teacher, as someone in the educational industry? One of the things I recognize is the following. For me, having a mentor, someone teaching me, is extremely important. Someone that I respect, their work that I respect. So what mentors do you have out there? Who do you feel close to that, you know what? How comfortable do you feel in terms of asking someone to assist you, aid you? There's an opportunity for you to ask yourself. And I think the last suggestion I have in terms of how an individual can overcome a plateau is an abbreviation I like to use. I did this, I think I did a video of this a long time ago on my YouTube channel, Ask_Teacher Will. Lie, live in English. One of the biggest complaints I'm sure that people have heard, or you've heard your students say, oh, I have no one to speak English with in my city, in my country. Really? In the 21st century, when we live in the digital age, in the world of globalization, there's a sizable percentage of the world that has an internet connection. We know sometimes that might just be fear or shyness, whatever, but live in English. Encourage your students, brothers and sisters, ladies and gentlemen, to immerse themselves. How can they do that? Well, they can connect to whatever their particular passions or hobbies in English are. Yes, we tell our learners and our students to sit back and change your phones, for example, or we tell them to watch movies or television series with subtitles, without subtitles, start, depending if they're at the beginner level, start using subtitles in their native language. And once they gain a sense of comfortability, using the subtitles and no subtitles at all. But really encourage your students to live in English. It could be the simplest thing when they wake up in the morning, and it's so interesting. I'm a little older than probably most people on the phone, but we live in the world of selfie, particularly this generation. So many students and learners are so quick to take selfies of their friends, or if they're out at the beach or the park or a cafe. And yet encourage your learners to sit back and, take a selfie or make a 1-minute video describing your day. The other thing I would say is two last things. Briefly, 2 R's. This is something that particularly helped me as I was learning French. I like to call the 2 R's: reflect and repeat. Encourage your learners really, and your students really, to reflect in terms of the aspect of, it's kind of like, okay, reflect look at their journey, have them reflect and have a really honest conversation with themselves and be like, hey, you know what, you're doing it. Sometimes I think learners they worry so much about the end goal without necessarily looking and seeing how far they come. So have them really reflect. And reflection, at least for me, gives me an opportunity, and might give your students, to reflect on those things that they did well, and then also for those things that they want to improve on in the future. And the last R that I would say is for me, is once a person reflects, they have an opportunity to repeat. And repeating whatever their English goals are, if they develop SMART goals, as I mentioned before, but have the opportunity to repeat processes. What's the value of repeating? For me, repeat builds consistency, and repeat builds retention. The last thing I would say is that in terms of in my own life, whether I'm a student or even if I'm on social media or even as a teacher, I think to recognize, for me, to overcome my plateau is to recognize I'm human and to acknowledge my fears. And then with respect to my fears, and I normally say this to students, so I'm going to say this as a student and as a human being. For me, it's normal to have fear. Fear is real. And I normally say to students, and I say to myself, I say, not teacher Will. Sometimes I have to have an honest conversation with myself. I say, hey, listen, William, you have 2 choices. Fear is real. Now, you can either sit back, rest in your fear, accept your fear. That's not right or wrong. Or you can decide to move, or as an abbreviation, face everything and rise. That's what I tell my learners. And that's one of the things that I tell myself. Now, only you know this. I ask you to think of the following. Do you, as a teacher, wherever you are, at whatever level you are, and do you have fear? Whatever that is. And if so, choices are not right or wrong, but you have to make a determination if you live with the consequences. So if there are particular things that you have fear about, if you have fear of pronunciation, if you have fear with respect to not being able to feel like, that you have a good relationship with your students, the question is, do you accept it or do you move? With that being said, in conclusion, I would say the following. I normally say this to my students when they ask me, oh, teacher, teacher Will, how can I become fluent? I want to be fluent. I want to speak like you. And I normally say to the learners, the ATW family, I'm like, listen, whatever your native language is, did you become fluent overnight? No. Are you still learning, whatever words, expressions in your native language now? Yes. I try to remind learners that it's kind of like, hey, you know what? The journey to English, it is not a sprint. It's a journey. It's a process. It's life. And I do believe it's possible that a person can overcome, a student can overcome their fear. And when they believe in themselves, and when not only they believe, but they actually do the work, and by focusing on the solutions and not the problems. Practice makes permanent. I don't actually, for me personally, let me just say this. I don't believe in the concept personally of practice makes perfect from a learner perspective, because I think that sometimes, at least with the students that I have, that's a false sense of illusion. And sometimes being perfect prevents students from obtaining their English goals, particularly as it relates to if they have speaking goals. And even in my own life, as a teacher and then also a learner and speaker of a second language, perfection is an illusion, at least in my own life. So for me, what really works is practice makes permanent and practice makes better. With that being said, I just want to thank everyone. I'm certainly take questions and answers. If anyone wants to get in contact with me, if anyone has questions or comments, these are my social medias. Well, I'm on more than, but these are the two primaries on. I'm on YouTube and Instagram under Ask Teacher Will.
I remember the first time, I don't remember when it was, but reading I think it was in the lexical approach where they talked about, the trying to get off the intermediate plateau.
Yes,
When
yeah.
I first heard that, and then what you were talking about now, it just reminded me of how important that is and how that resonates with so many English learners, language learners in general. But we're focusing on English learners. But I really enjoyed how you also talked about teachers. I put in the chat there, are you plateauing?
I saw that. And I'm glad you did that.
Yeah, because I mean, I didn't think you were going to necessarily do that. I thought you were just going to be focusing on learners. And it struck me that, how are we as teachers going to really be able to help and understand, identify this plateau that learners are experiencing, if we ourselves are plateauing, so if we recognize ourselves what's going on, and not as language learners as much as, like you're saying, just as teachers, just how important that is.
Brother, I appreciate that. I mean, case in point, I mean, think about this. I mean, how many of us have been in classes where we tell our students and we tell our learners, oh, push the envelope, think outside of the box. And yet I have to ask myself, okay, am I practicing what I'm preaching?
That's right.
I'm telling my students to push the envelope. I'm telling my students to think outside of the box. And yet I might be teaching like a verb tense, ing to present continuous, the same way for 3 years.
That's right.
So am I being really honest? So for me, it was really interesting while I was preparing, because originally it clicked like 10 minutes before this. I'm kind of like, wait a minute, William, are you crazy? That applies to you as well. And so oftentimes I do think that, I certainly have a title as Teacher Will, right? And I'm a teacher, but I don't, when I'm with the learners, I'm kind of like, listen, my job is to help you motivate, you, inspire you to achieve your goals. Okay, whatever, it's the world of teacher, but we all know this, we're all teachers, it's a symbiotic relationship. I can lead a horse to water, I can't make him drink, but yet I'm a teacher and I'm a learner and I'm a student. So how open am I plateauing?
Exactly. And it's, we all know, not even just obviously in the world of English learning or language learning, but just we look back, which teachers, motivated us, inspired us the most. It's usually the ones that, we see being excited, thinking out the box, outside the box, like doing, as opposed to, telling us we need to do it ourselves,
Exactly.
and that I think is also important when we're talking about, how much our students are living in English, as you said, the acronym, like lie, like immerse, you're lying in it, not the other kind of lie.
Right. Yeah. Exactly.
But where teachers are saying, just go out and speak English. Look, there's so much out there. It's not like that, right? It's like, yes, it's out there. So how, what can you do that will inspire your students to go get it? As if you're just telling them to go do it, that to me that's the plateau thing.
Truly.
If that's what you're doing as a teacher, then you're probably plateauing.
Truly. I mean, certainly I think our roles, that we have an opportunity to be, mentors and coach and guide them in terms of it, based on what their interests and what their hobbies are. So certainly we can guide them. But I've just heard a lot of people say, and that, oh, that I have no one to speak in. And I'm just kind of like, okay, really, let's analyze that. Because I do think that I understand where the question comes from, but I do think that sometimes that might be either a reflex reaction where a learner just says that,
Right.
or it might actually be just kind of like an excuse. I'm kind of like, okay, well, you know what, 20 years ago, when I was learning French, there was not let me say it like this, there was not the amount of resources that we have now.
Absolutely not.
So I do think that, again, we as teachers can sit back and provide guidance, but when I hear learners saying, I've normally said this, and again, my approach is just my approach, I'm not saying it's the best, but when I hear people saying like, oh, I don't have time to learn, I can't find anybody to speak with, I'm like, listen, for me personally, this is a personal professional principle. Time is the most precious commodity that I have. If English is important to me, I will find the time to do it and to report. And if a learner is comfortable with not want to learn, no problem. But please don't not in 2021.
That's right, but it also could be what you're talking about fears. You know, excuses can come from maybe it's that they're not in touch yet, as you were explaining.
Truly,
how important it is,
truly.
So it's about it's often about that too, I think. But I wanted to ask you. We have a question here first before I ask you any more.
Sure.
Jessica has a question. She says that it seems like so much of this is reliant on the self-awareness of the teacher leader in the classroom. What tools do you use to grow in your awareness, and what would you recommend? So how would you grow your self-awareness as a teacher? Like what?
So as a teacher, yeah, that's a really good question. Thank you, Jessica, for asking. So I just view my life as life is a series of lessons, and self-awareness is a process. And so what are the things that I've done? I read a lot of, well, I used to read more than I do now, to be honest. I'm kind of like, most of the reading I do now is like English associated ESL stuff. But I like to read about, obviously industry, latest teaching techniques. But for me, my perspective on English it might be different, because for me, English is life. It is looking at my own life, drawing from my own personal experience, and then from the experiences of my students. And my learners. So it's kind of like, I love history, I love politics, I love economics. I will draw that in. In terms of specific tools, I'm a websites. Interesting. So websites that I use, that I live by as it relates to grammar. I love EnglishPage.com. I live in terms of tools, in terms of creating awareness. I use English for Everyone. So those are particular tools from the English perspective. Other materials that I've used before in the past is I've used The Godfather. I've used Rich Dad Poor Dad, which I love. And then also in terms of other tools is at one time, this is when I was teaching in Chicago before I came to Saudi Arabia. I had a bunch of upper intermediate individuals, and then what we did is that each of them were responsible for bringing a book, their favorite book, and then we discussed the book. We had individual and group activities around that. So we had a reading around that, and also made them do it. But a lot of the resources or tools that I use is really what resonates in my life. In terms of self-awareness, I would answer with the following. I would say this. I think I've usually been the type of person that not always, but I don't really like focusing. I'm not saying this is right or wrong. I normally like to focus on my weaknesses or areas of development. There are certain things that I think that I do well. So in terms of like, from what I've been told from my teacher, well, you're a motivator, you're a life coach. So I know my strengths. However, and I try to focus on my areas of development. So for example, when I first started teaching, I knew grammar intuitively, but I did not know the rules, and I did not necessarily know how to explain it to someone. And so I really look at those areas in terms of like, okay, what do I need to improve? Do I need to improve, understanding grammar? Whatever those areas of development are, number one. Number two is that if we have teachers here on social media, or they decide to social media, I look at like, okay, what things do I need to improve on? So for example, I had the concepts, I had the ideal, I had no problem getting in front of a video or getting in front of a camera, but I was not good as an editor. So, Jessica, I hope that answers your question. Last thing I would say on self-awareness, that's key for me because I do think, and I don't, again, I don't know if I don't know if the learners or the ATW, my face-to-face learners, or whatever that I have at my job, or people that decide to take courses with me, or even the ATW family. I don't necessarily know if I know that, but for me, questioning is huge. I ask a lot of questions. I encourage my students to be critical thinkers because I do think, from at least my perspective, they're conditioned to their. I don't know if everyone would agree, but it's my perspective. A lot of people learning English are conditioned to think that they're less than or they're beneath because they're comparing themselves to something they're not. So for me, based on my personal experience and then also the English journey in terms of learners, regardless of who they are, I ask a lot of questions.
I couldn't agree more with what you just said. I think that's a whole nother webinar we could have, and be interesting to hear different teachers' perspectives. By the way, I'm thinking of having a kind of panel discussion, featured teachers that we've had on the program. And that would be a really interesting topic because I think that's enormously important, that when you're learning another language, you're kind of in this position, where it's so easy to feel, people's prejudice, people's stereotypes, people, feeling like, you're not native, you're not fluent, all this stuff. And whether it's conscious or not, the industry, language learning industry definitely feeds off that and plays into it at times.
Definitely.
You could look at it cynically. I don't think it has to be just that. I think it also just, if you're not confronting that, then it's just going to happen. And I think that's something that's really important. It gets into the whole idea of confidence that you talked about. And
true. Teacher Jason, and to your point, from a learner's perspective, most definitely. And then, I think also, we talk about, let's say, bias or like subconscious or implicit bias, but then also from a teaching perspective, think about how people on the call and then people listening in the future, how does that impact us as teachers, particularly with the advent of social media?
Yeah,
so it's kind of like, oh, I don't have the number of followers, or why don't they like my content, or things of that nature. And I do think sometimes that's important to ask. I mean, because I noticed when I first started on social media, and this is, we're talking about epiphanies or breakthroughs, right? I'll be very honest with you. I've moved to the point now in my journey as it relates to social media, I do content for me. And if a learner or someone that chooses to follow me, because I understand it's a choice, if I'm able to motivate them and inspire them and assist them with their English goals, then I'm very happy about that. But in my own sense of sanity, I decided to do content on me. But I do remember when I first came out, I was like, well, where do I begin and where do I start? And why is this teacher doing that? All of that. So I do think an area that would be an excellent conversation, and I encourage you to do it at some point in the future. But the impact that we have as teachers.
Yeah, and just the whole idea of inferiority complexes with social media as teachers, I think is interesting.
Native, non-native, this or that.
I mean, what you just said about how you started out. So if for those of you who don't know, Teacher Will has a really big presence in social media on Instagram more than anywhere else, I believe. Correct me if I'm wrong. And that's a really important thing to discuss, I feel, because, why do you have it? I'm not going to ask you to explain it all, but you just said something interesting, which was when you started, you felt like, you weren't sure what you should post or how to do it and all of that. And then now, you said you're doing it more for you, and if someone likes it and they follow it, that's great. Well, they do. I mean, you have a lot of followers. You're getting closer to 100,000 followers. So what I want to ask you is, everyone goes through what you went through when you started. So, but many people don't get to where you are. So what do you think? And maybe you want to connect this to what you talked about today, with the intermediate, with the plateau, and how do you feel? Why do you feel that so many learners want to follow you? And what is there something you did or have done or are doing now that you think would be important for other teachers to know about, who also want to get that kind of engagement or in that, on Instagram and other places with learners?
So let me tell you my social journey briefly. I had no intention of getting on social media at all, to be very honest with you. Basically what happened is this: I was teaching at a language school. There were four guys that were my former students. I called the four. They begged me. And one in particular, Ahmed, it was on a Tuesday, it was on a Thursday night because I was going to the gym. He was like, Teacher Will, you gotta get on social media, gotta get on social media. I was like, oh God, all right. I literally told him, I said, okay, I'll go home and pray about it. So I made a,
just let me ask, when was this, just to put it in perspective? Time
2000, oh God, when was it? Yeah, 2000, August 30th, 2016.
2016
was when I first got on Instagram, right? So I was like, okay. So I went home, I prayed about it. I was like, the God of my understanding. I was like, God, you want me to do this? God, my God said yes. And then God was like, okay, help these poor people. So anyway, if you go back and look on my Instagram, the first video that I did was upside down. It was like this. I was in a suit, right? So I had apprehensions. And so for a very long time, it's like, I remember, listen, at the end of December of 2016, I had 531 followers. And then the March of 2017, I hit over 10,000. Briefly, my journey was this. Like when I first got on, I was kind of like, oh my God, you know, I'm a teacher. What content am I going to do? I didn't see a lot of people that looked like me, not saying that they didn't exist. Who do you talk to? Who do you not talk to? All this other stuff. And luckily, I had the foreign support system there. I want to say a couple things. Number one, numbers only tell a story. Meaning this, I've never bought a follower in my life. I'm not knocking people that have bought that. One of the things, you know, and we could have another conversation about that. What's important to me is engagement. But how I increased on my journey is that, okay, I didn't know what I was doing. For me, I was kind of the person, like if you say to me, like my philosophy, my thoughts on social media, how I grew, whatever like that, I started having it's a process. It was a process. It was a journey. I was like, okay, let's figure out what works, what doesn't work. I started doing live Instagrams. I remember the first live Instagram I did was January of 2018. I had 11 people on there as OGF. So I started going through the thing and I was like, okay, now you asked me why people follow me. I don't know. You would need to ask them that. I don't know. No, seriously. I mean,
I get you. But what would you say if a teacher said, okay, you don't need to tell us, maybe you don't know why they do, but what
I would hope I could say, I'm sorry, brother, I could say this. I would hope that people follow me if they want to be inspired, if they want to be inspired or to motivate or to think critically. Because I don't consider myself a traditional teacher where it's kind of like, I'm going to give you all the answers. No. So I would hope that people follow me because, you know, and notice, I'm going to make a point. Notice I'm saying I hope. I would hope that people follow me because they look at my content and it's like, wow, you know what? He's teaching me about English. The feedback that I've heard is this, brother. People have said to me before in the past, and again, you would have to ask people why they follow me. People have said to me in the past, oh, Teacher Will, you know what? You're a teacher, but like, you're a teacher, but you're like a motivator. And the way you do English, you're like a life coach and stuff. So you would particularly ask them, but the way that I look at it is, for me, as someone who knows English, as someone who speaks another language, I look at English as life and to present it in different ways and then give people the opportunity. But I encourage my learners, I'm kind of like, you know what, walk the walk, talk the talk. You talk about the plateau. I probably think, to be honest with you, the end of last year or the beginning of this year, excuse me, I was at a plateau. I was like, why am I doing this? What's the value? What's the importance? Like, is anybody getting help? Is anybody seeing value? Whatever. I didn't have really a pity party with myself, but I was human. I was kind of like, hey, listen, you know what? You put content out there. I asked for feedback. I asked for comments. Obviously, people can do that. That's a choice they do. And I was really at a plateau. And then on YouTube, I did a video. And I was talking to a colleague of mine I call the legend, the living legend Leon, and we had a really long conversation. And then I think probably the shift for me was that, you know what? I understood a couple of things. Number one, let me go back real quick. One of the reasons, and when I first started in social media, was Ahmed, one of the core members, said to me, here was the thing I had to make an adjustment. He was like, William, people don't want to learn. They want to have fun. Your videos are too serious. You got to make it right. So he was like, and I remember I fought him for like 3 months. And And then finally, I was stubborn, no longer stubborn, excuse me. And then I saw growth that way. But probably, it was probably April of this year. I said, you know what? Listen, don't care about the numbers. Because I recognize this. Social media for the vast percentage of people is for entertainment. For the vast percentage of people, it's for entertainment. That's not to negate the fact that, hey, you know what, there is a percentage of learners that are sitting there and they actually use it. But social media by design is for entertainment.
And you can learn, but you can learn through entertainment.
And you can learn through entertainment. Yes, I definitely agree with you.
Yeah.
So there's usually an aspect of my content on social media that is entertainment.
Absolutely.
Because I'm in the beast. But yet, if I would ask most learners, what's the last video I did on Instagram, they couldn't tell me. So for me, there was a shift. I'm like, you know what? The majority of video or the majority of social media is for entertainment purposes. The majority of people are not even going to care because it's for free. That's a reality.
Yeah.
That's not to say that a percentage doesn't.
Yeah.
So you know what, William? Why are you doing this? What impact do you want to have? Start doing it for yourself. Start doing content that you want to do, that you were afraid or apprehensive of doing because either you didn't think that the learners were going to enjoy it or like it, or you were afraid what your fellow colleagues in the social media atmosphere thought about you. So the shift for me is that I started doing content for me.
Well, I don't know about your colleagues, but definitely the learners love it because more and more of them are following you. So I think that was the right move. But again, you didn't make the move for them or for anybody else. It was for you.
No, there was something that happened this year. And part of it was like COVID, and it gave us an opportunity. You know, I did a lot of self-reflection, right? But it was that. And then the other shift it was kind of like, you know what? I said, listen, William, you know, the goal on Instagram is to have 100,000 family members. Why? Because real talk. When I first decided back in 2016, I said to my God, I was like, okay, God, you want me to do this? I'm going to do this. You want me to help these kids? I'm going to do this. Then you know what? My hope and prayer, whenever that is let me get to 100,000 family members, right? Because that just was something that whatever. So whenever we get there, we're going to have a good celebration. We're going to party. I'm going to do giveaways or whatever. Why? Because I recognize people choose to follow me. Yeah. And, you know, that's what I want to do. But I just do it for me. And then hopefully what's very important for me, two last things, brother Jason, teacher Jason. Number one, I don't normally, because I don't believe in this. Like you asked me the question earlier, why do people, I normally don't talk about myself. I let my work speak for me. Because I've noticed life has taught me, you know what? Don't talk about yourself. Let your work talk about you. And it's been my experience where it's kind of like, you know what? When you talk about yourself, people are human. They get jealous, either consciously or subconsciously. So you let other people talk about yourself. So when I hear people say like, oh, teacher, will you motivate? I have to learn to sit back and say thank you. Right. But I don't worry. I don't normally talk about myself. I'd rather let the work that I do speak for me.
And your work is very consistent in that way, I think. You know, when you have something that comes out, you know, here's Teacher Will with another, you know, jewel of wisdom, and you know the way you do it, you're very relaxed and funny, but not trying hard to be, you know, funny or to be this or to be that. You're definitely yourself, and people respect you for it. And
thank you.
Yeah.
I learned that, and then the last thing I learned is I'm like, you know what? Just be humble, William. Just be humble. Yeah. And being humble for me means this. This is one, and I don't believe in saying never a lot, but I'm going to say this. And this is one thing that I'm very proud about myself. And I normally don't talk about myself, but I'm going to do it because we have people here. I have never forgotten what it was to have 561 followers. Right. So for me, if I can, why do I say that? That keeps me humble. That keeps me grounded, because there are some people that I know, and let me preface by saying, content providers can do whatever they want to do. That's their business. They can make whatever content they want. But it's kept me very humble, because I'm like, you know what? I did not do this by myself. Right. It was the ATW family helped me. There were teachers there that decided to go live with me. So there were times where, you know what? If I'm able to use my platform to help somebody else and we're in sabbatical, I'm going to do that. Why? Because someone helped me. Yeah. And that keeps me humble, because I'm not one of these people that, I did it on my own. Baloney.
Yeah, well, that's another thing that I'm glad you mentioned, because it really is, you know, there's definitely a network, a nice, close network of teachers that do similar things that you do, and you're doing lives with them. You know, you're helping each other out. That's huge.
Yeah, and that's right. That's personal choice, teacher Jason, because that's the thing. But I'm going to say this without naming names, because that's not important. But there are okay, let me say it like this. Somebody just said, who was it? Answer, oh, I follow Teacher Will because he keeps things real. Okay, yeah, so let me keep it real. Okay. You and I both know, brother, there are people in our industry that, oh, you know what? Oh, I'm not going to talk to that person. They're not native. I'm not going to talk to that person because they don't have 10,000 followers.
Yep.
You know what? Now, I have as we say, let's use slang English. I have the receipt. I've did a live Instagram with 500 people, with 500 followers, all the way up to 1 million followers. Because for me, it's not about that. It's about engagement. Because you know what? It's about engagement. And ultimately, it's about like when I say the ATW family, for me, I believe that they're not my biological family, but they're my family, right? And just like family, some people leave, some people drop, but you know what? It's their thing. So for me, I remember what it is to have 561.
Right on. We have to stop in a moment. We have some great comments from Jessica here. One thing quickly, let's see, English language, if they're lucky enough to live that life, they don't get paid for mediocre native speaker. Yeah, exactly. We definitely need to have a native, non-native speaker, teacher discussion at some point. Before we go, I just want to say, I never heard, I'm thrilled to have heard it the first time. You know, I'm not a practice makes perfect person either, for exactly the same reasons you mentioned. So I often talk about practice makes progress, and as much as I like that, wow, practice makes permanent. I never. Where did that come from?
I was on a live Instagram one day. I don't remember with who at this moment. And they kept saying practice makes progress, practice makes progress.
Right.
And then I just related it to when I was learning French or when I was running a bike. And I'm like, you know what? Practice makes permanent.
That's you.
Doesn't mean I don't.
So you came up with that.
I don't no stop, brother. I don't know if I'm gonna I don't wanna listen.
I'm gonna look online. But anyway, you did come up with it. Whether someone else also came up with it, the point is,
I don't know. But for me, it made sense because I'm like, you know what? The more I do something, the more permanent it stands. It doesn't mean I don't have.
Well, you know, my whole thing is about practice and how you can, if you're gonna have, you know, language right here to use, that's it's always gonna be there. It comes from how many times you're repeating it in a fun, meaningful way. So for me, the permanence thing, you know, that's the retrieval.
Right,
you know, that's just huge, man. So I'm definitely going to be borrowing that one, but I'll give the credit where credit is due. You know,
we do that all the time. You know, just whatever.
Teacher Will, thank you so much. You know how much I respect what you do, and as I tell you, as I've told you several times, I hope we can collaborate in the future. Maybe when we have it, there's a point where we are not as busy. Something on Instagram, YouTube, we'll figure it out. I love your ideas. I love your energy. I love, as Teacher Ann said, the way you keep things real. So glad you could be our featured teacher. American TESOL Institute thanks you. I thank you. And yeah, I hope you have a good rest of your day.
You too. Thank you very much again for having me. Everybody, keep learning. Keep learning. Last thing I'll say, walk the walk and talk the talk. Two last things. Walk the walk, talk the talk. And my life thing. If they ain't part of your family, whether it's biological, chosen family, if they ain't paying your bills, pay them no mind. Brother, thank you very much for having me.
Can't stop, won't stop. Walk the walk. All right.
Thank you.
Salute to you, sir.